This conference will now be recorded.
So I would like to share my experiences in the field of simplified technical English with you, especially seeing how this international standard helps to make the creation and management of global documentation a little bit less of a headache. And we're talking about the standard based on practical experiences over the past 10 years in many different industries. So I believe that most of us will recognize this kind of juggling. It almost looks like a simulation from a computer game. So every time you find yourself advancing into the next level, it probably means that you have risen above previous challenges. We definitely, as writers, as tech docs managers, we have business requirements to take into account on top of our regular daily workload. Just getting the work done is not enough. There are various considerations like your time to market, or as the case may be, downtime. Of course, we're sometimes forced to cut corners and save costs where possible. And at the same time, we also want to grow as a team, as a company, to be less dependent on a specific supplier. So this means a continuous juggling game where we are going to try and keep everything in balance to get our projects finalized on time, within the budget, and with the right quality without any further compromises. We want to be able to do the work or get the work done our way. So documentation is a very essential item. Unfortunately, half the time it comes at the last, it only happens at the last moment. Documentation, more often than not, kicks in when the product is already late and we are already over budget for the product life cycle, and we just need to cut corners, or we are expected to cut corners. However, we still want to stand behind what we do, making sure that we provide a quality product. So here we are seeing some of the common problems associated with the use of standard English, or whatever people regard as proper language, even when writing documentation. We do find that many readers, many users of documentation get confused at times, and it's not so surprising for the reasons listed here, because part of the information is not being conveyed in a very clear, easy to understand way. Language can be part of that. The use of confusing words, ambiguous words, different words for the very same thing, they all contribute to confusing the reader. And therefore, he, she is going to need more time to read and hopefully still understand what we're trying to tell them. Of course, it can easily prompt your user to get annoyed, frustrated, call the help desk, or even worse, not to subscribe to your product or line of services anymore. Hence, a loss of customer loyalty. Now, just to bring in a different factor is that one of the very important drivers for the initiatives to try and do away with standard English, to simplify English, to remove complex aspects of standard language has been translation. I'm not, sorry, Swapnil, can you, okay, yeah. So I'm just trying to look into the chat messages from time to time, but if you think you can't hear me, just unmute your mic and let me know on the spot. Otherwise, I might be missing out on some things. So as I was saying that translations as a very important driver behind the initiatives for Simplified English, um, because in itself, translation is a highly complicated process. And there is a very important reason why we have to consider translations. We need an ever increasing number of translations, and translations as such are definitely very, very expensive. So translation quality, as you can tell, would suffer when language is not standardized. So whether it is ambiguity and the lack of consistency in your source text, so keeping translation costs affordable has been a huge motivating factor for attempts to standardize, simplify the English language, English grammar, as the source for translations. Also, many products require training for engineers or service staff, even for users, operators, and of course, technical documentation normally forms the basis for training materials. Again, if your training materials or tech docs have complex language, it's going to make it more difficult to get your message across. So training definitely will eat up more of your time, be very much less effective, and therefore affects the usability of your product. So documentation in the end is all about getting our important messages across. So simplified English, if you can already predict it a little bit, because of the standardization in the choice of words, in the limited number of grammatical tenses that you could tap into, overall it helps us to achieve quite a number of benefits. We become more consistent on a word level. That starts with the simple fact that we are going to use the same word whenever we refer to the same thing. So that means an improved level of consistency for sure. The same happens to sentence structure or phrases. Also, if we have a scatter team like 3 writers permanently employed in the US, a few content writers sitting here with us in Singapore in office, and a different team in Japan, all of them will contribute to the same content. Some of them are professional writers, or others are engineers. It doesn't matter. They all start to work and fish from the same pond. They have the same rules and the same words to use and to apply. So it is not going to continue. Well, it's not going to completely eliminate individual differences between writing styles and characteristics, but it is going to go a very long way towards standardizing and making sure that we can put those different parts of the documentation together to get a consistent manual and result without the need for rework or editing. And I once also, I recall that once I had a chat with a colleague from Australia that simply the motivating reason for him to acquire simplified English training for his whole team is in the hopes that all of his manuals will read as if they came from the same company. So reading with one voice can also be a crucial factor for your branding in this instance. So I just wanted to quickly give you an idea what simplified English really is. Simplified English is also known as Simplified Technical English, and to make it language independent, we sometimes call it a controlled language. And that's where you start to restrict the number of terms that you have in your vocabulary, as well as limit the way you make use of grammar tenses. So in natural English or standard English, as we would call it, as a tech writer, you would often say, in order to perform X installation process, please ensure that all of the following steps are done. If you've been writing for more than 3 years, it's very easy to get numb or immune to sentences like that, because this is really the kind of writing that you get within the technical writing industry. But if you try to shorten this sentence, so taking the example of one of our colleagues based in Israel who took the training with us for 2 days, and she starts writing in STE, which promotes conciseness and accuracy. So she started writing the sentence, rewriting it in such a way that says, to perform X installation process, verify you have done the subsequent steps. However, this is not quite full-blown STE yet. As I've said, documentation is all about getting your message across. So if you had to write this sentence a bit better in STE, then it's simply to install X, do these steps. So it has been close to 10 years since this colleague of ours has been working with STE. And she used to be representing a company called NetLogo. The product is basically a multi-agent programmable modeling environment. And as you can see, she made a short video clip of how she would actually demonstrate how STE can be put into action right after you get this training. So this is just going to be a short video clip of how she actually works with STE. So on the left would be an existing documentation that she's working to convert to STE. And to the right, she has the STE specification, or spec in short, opened. She takes out one sentence that she thinks could be improved. So she looks up some words, or she thinks that some words could be more easily replaced with simpler alternatives, and she would look up words that are that she's not sure if they are approved or non-approved. So she looks it up, the word in the dictionary. Chances are you don't find a recommendation for this word, anonymous, so then there is no strong reason not to use it. It could be kept as a company-specific word, for instance. So you could actually use technical names that are unique to your organization. So that's very well justified. We don't simply throw out words at will in STE, but we do regulate and filter termed candidates. So she will be working through the documents like this, going through words, or seeing if, for example, there is a passive voice in this case, then she would very likely want to try and turn this around into an active voice. So this is basically how you could already start working in STE, as long as you have proper training used in conjunction with the specification that is roughly 400 pages. So unlikely that people would study or learn the spec independently. More possible is, much more likely is that they would come to us for advice and for guidance. Okay, so moving on, I just wanted to quickly show you a cross-section of the clients, customers that we have trained and work with. Well, although STE, if you have not already heard, it is an aerospace standard, or at the very least, it started off that way, given the success of STE. And its adaptability, it has since been applied to various document types over time, and increasingly also in other mainly technical industries. So in my humble opinion, STE is, for me, one of the most versatile standards to try and get in control of your technical English communications. Now, When I first got in touch with Swapnil, I think one of the questions that came to mind was, can STE be applied to various documents? And the answer the answer I gave him was a resounding yes. And this is going to be one of the first case studies, one of 3 case studies that we will be looking at today. So BeWise is a customer of ours based in Holland. They were in recent years acquired by NASDAQ, and they are one of the few leading organizations that are capable of creating technological solutions for governance, risk management, and compliance related to business activities, as well as streamlining regulatory processes within the organizations of any scale, so big and small companies alike all around the world. So this is the software that they have created for clients. You can access it from a mobile device, from an iPad, or just simply from the computer. So how do we manage this kind of writing with the use of simplified English? So of course, the first 2 examples is not intending to, I don't intend to um, do a complete, just one second. I don't intend to like do a complete overhaul of the text. I just want you to maybe spend half a minute to look at the content on both sides, both in the left and the right column. Take a look for yourselves, and you'll see that the changes are not big. Okay, you see that some of the words have been changed, and you probably would know that it's quite likely STE does not allow for certain words like doesn't allow for certain words like the capability to perform. So it includes the capability to perform Monte Carlo simulations within BeWise. You don't have to say the capability, you simply say it does. And STE also does away with synonyms. So if it's the word between a choice between various and different, then different is very likely the choice of word in STE. Okay, so you see that the wording gets simpler and it draws closer to words that we first started to acquire in our formative years. So different versus various, related as opposed to associated with. And one of the most common phrasing in technical writing is, in order to calculate. You don't really need this kind of standard wording. You could simply say that each simulation uses a different set of random values from the probability functions to calculate those probabilities heuristically. Okay. Now, I'm just gonna pause here for a bit, and I do see some questions coming in, and hopefully we'll get a chance to answer those afterwards. But for now, my quick answer to Lana's question is that I am unfortunately not well versed in Pinker's classical English, so I'm just going to have to pass on that question, and if anyone knows better what it is, then maybe we could further this discussion at the end of this presentation. Okay, so so this slide is intended to show you a little bit of how an STE rewriting will take place once we meet with a client We don't try to rewrite everything unless it was really presented in a very awkward manner and it requires 100% overhaul of their writing. So this is something to guide people, to guide writers into my world of STE. Now, I have over the years been asked this question, what is STE? Some people see it as the grammar police, making sure that everybody toes the line. And actually, this is not the kind of answer that I would give where STE is concerned. There are many different answers. I won't give them all. You're always welcome to discuss this further during Q&A if you like, but one straightforward answer is that it's a set of 53 writing rules, 53 and a half, I would say. But strictly speaking, it's 53 writing rules. Now, you might be thinking at the back of your head that this is very similar to what you come across in many companies, especially with the larger corporations, what they may have in place, that it is often known as a corporate style guide. Well, much of the corporate style guide will tell you which words to use, which syntax to try and avoid. So those 53 writing rules, many of the rules you will be quite familiar with, especially as professional writers and editors. Well, I must say that it's not the rules themselves that make Simplified English unique, but one aspect that makes it rather unique, STE rather unique, is the fact that STE is a very balanced and rather complete set of rules. It was not based on the personal preferences of just one or two people, but a whole committee behind this that has developed the standards. So some of them are linguists, some of them engineers, some of them are from airlines, some of them from operators, some of them are from the manufacturing side, some of them from the MROs. So many different people with different viewpoints, some of them native English speakers, some of them native speakers of French, German, Italian, Spanish, Russian, and some other languages. So they've established over the years, actually over the last 3 decades, if not more, that these writing rules do make a lot of sense and allow them to rewrite any of their existing documentation based on these rules, making their documentation easier to understand while maintaining accuracy and validity. So that makes this set of STE writing rules rather valuable. And overall, as you can see, the benefits of STE is that overall you are bringing up your levels of readability, consistency, and doing away with a lot of the ambiguities that were previously not addressed. It opens up conversations between silos. I get the impression that technical writers sometimes work independently of R&D or designers. So when you bring people to the table and they speak the common language or write in the common language of STE, it does open many conversations, discussion topics, and people will be more motivated to address gray areas of concerns. And overall, you get much cleaner technical content to work with. So what are your expectations for STE, you might ask? I might ask. So STE, as I've mentioned, it's close to 400 pages of reading. So you have about half of it would be the rules, and the other half is actually the general dictionary. And here you are looking at one of the dictionary entries. So one of the rules from STE I would consider the most important basically tells us that you can only use approved words, and that is where Simplified English becomes really different from corporate style guides, because the specification includes a core vocabulary of around 930 words. So those 930 words will allow you to write just about everything that you need for technical documentation, even for procedural information in general. Basically, these are the words that glue your product documentation together. This is like the cement or the glue for building your documents. Most of the words are very generally valid for technical documentation purposes. That's a very, very good question, Swapnil. So Swapnil asked if I've had the experience where STE has been converted to or have become a part of a writing style guide. Definitely. I've had writers who took a training from us, and in the end, after 6 months of consultancy, they also developed STE training internally, making sure that because they do not necessarily hail from the airlines or the aviation field, so if they've decided to adopt STE as a standard without compromising on internal guidelines, then yes, they have definitely invented flavors of STE that are palatable, not just to aerospace and defense people, but also to staff from within the organization. One of it is known as EASE, EASE, which stands for Electa Approved Simplified English. And Electa is a company that is very much involved in equipment for the healthcare, for medical interventions in the field, specifically in the field of chemotherapy. Okay, so moving on, I would like to bring our attention to the second example, Kaspersky. I believe most of us are quite familiar with Kaspersky by now. They are very much leaders in the field of cybersecurity, both for large corporations and also for personal use at home. Now, Kaspersky came to us for the training in 2017, I believe, and without having any fancy language checker tools that would cost much, much more. So we introduced them to the idea of STE, and also showing that in order to declutter your standard English vocabulary, these are the few things you need. So a rummage in the toolbox will show that, okay, first of all, I need the specification, I need a worksheet to tell me which are the approved and non-approved verbs, and I need good solid training from an experienced trainer. So where most of our colleagues at Kaspersky are native Russian language speakers, so they've decided to come up with this list of terms for their terminology database, knowing that, okay, these are the words that we agree to use and start using right now for our technical documentation, and then what is the corresponding translations in Russian. So we had a look at this list. Not we didn't raise that many red flags, with the exception of a few words here that you see in red. So why did we do that? So if we look at some of these words, they are clearly not STE, and there is a better alternative presented. So you see that the word notify is to let the chief inspector know or let somebody know. Determine is replaced with find, give, or select. If you perform an operation in this work environment, then you simply do. So we did not flag every word, telling them that you cannot use all of these words, because some words are still very much valid in the world of Kaspersky. So STE does have guidelines for customer-specific terms. Most of them are known as technical names or technical verbs. Basically, these are those terms that are nouns, most of them mainly, okay, that you need in order to write meaningful content about your specific product or services. You will not do away with most of your product-specific terminology. However, it will help, STE will help you regulate and filter your terminology word base. So another way to look at simplified English is to say, well, simplified English is simply the most important and a rather universal standard for technical English because of the reasons that I've given, the balanced set of rules, the dictionary on top of the flexibility for you to include words that are unique to your organization. So the basic thing is we want to make sure that within a given context, we only add one word for every meaning, and those words that we choose only have one meaning. So one word, one meaning, both ways. Now, okay, let me just take a look at the question box. So far, so good. I hope everyone is still with us. So let me just quickly show you a few impressions from the specification. You do see that computer processes and applications are very valid words for any organization heavily involved in the IT business, software documentation, etc. Okay, so these words are definitely going to stay. There is no, you will not, don't go away with the impression that you will be removing most of your product specific terminology. It is really not the case. Now, so again, I just wanted to share with you a short bit of what we did for Kaspersky. So some of the words that we flagged that are not approved in Simplified English, we would offer them a simpler alternative like select. Specify the following actions could be more elegantly worded as include these steps. Is more direct, and you don't leave your users wondering which following actions, because follow in Simplified English has the meaning of to come after. However, the ing form is not used. So the present participle or the present or the continuous tense is not used that much in STE. So don't turn on the virtual machine action to perform automatically. Do not set the virtual machine to automatic operation when the server starts. Save state action to take, save state when virtualization server stops. So by now you see that STE can do a little bit to replace non-approved words, but at the same time, as the technical writer, if you're not sure what the original meaning of that sentence could be, then it's always better to do your rewriting in consultation with a subject matter expert internally. And that's what we normally do because nobody is a master of all trades. So again, you see that the wording in STE is always quite clear. The request must have this information. If you say should, then it could be perceived or construed as a moral obligation, but you don't necessarily have to comply. So should is not as strong a word as must. So that is why in STE we use the word must very often. So I'll leave you to read through the rest of the sentences, those steps, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay. So you see that the perfect tense has rejected the request. You simply, if you do not get approval, so perfect tenses, we also do away with in controlled English. Now, the final case study that I'm going to show you is closer to home, Acronis. Now, they do have like it's operating like an MNC, and they are very good. They are definitely experts when it comes to setting the standard for backup solutions, data loss, prevention of data loss, and how people can share information securely in the cloud or on their servers. So quite a big company with many users. And definitely they build they have a lot of considerations when it comes to uh, documentation for clients. So just take a look at how it is always better to how we could actually, I'm just going to show you this case study of how we actually help them revamp their existing content to better readable, user-friendlier documentation. So just take maybe half a minute to go through this. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you a comparison between what was the original text versus what could have been better written, better organized in STE. Okay, so just to also answer one of the questions posed before, if you actually run this text through an STE language checking tool, I believe that is what you were referring to, Lana, then chances are that the software tool is going to pick up a few, it's going to flag a few unapproved words. So words like provide and words like by having, that's a passive. But I have not come across a tool that is completely taking over the role of a technical writer. So he or she just has to parse the text through a checking tool and comes back with a cup of coffee and already the text is written in STE. So this is more likely an interactive process and very much relies on the autonomy of the tech writer, which is why I probably have mentioned in passing that you cannot just independently study the specification or dive into a tool right away that does the work for you, because it very much relies on your training as a tech writer in STE, how fluent. Think of it as picking up a new language at school. Think about it in terms of proficiency and how often you get to use it. So the more you practice STE, the better, the sharper your language skills. So if you start writing in STE at first, it might be a bit more awkward and you might stumble, fumble a little bit. And then as you practice more, you will see that your writing improves and it becomes, in a way that it comes to you like second nature. Yes, I agree that an online checking tool would be very interesting and they exist. So we work with 2 companies in Germany. They are so I will drop a few 2 names here, Acronis and Congri. They are 2 very good partners that we work with when it comes to implementing STE, so that writers, instead of committing trying to memorize all 53 technical writing rules. Once they have had the training, they could already work in these checking tools to be doing a sort of refresher training and also learning on the job. So there are actually more than 2 software solutions out there, and these are the only ones that we work with, based on based on years of experience and working with them, knowing them over the years. So yes, a tool will definitely be very interesting. And if you think you want to take a look at those, we could reschedule for a different time slot to take a closer look. But in the end, the idea of this presentation is to show people that in fact, if you like, you could already start writing in ST without a tool, although a tool would be nice. Okay, so this is the kind of simplified English writing that we would normally do for our clients. And also seeing that many of the sentences that you could see here are overlapping or redundant, so then you don't see the sentence being shown in the rewrite, because it's already covered. So if there is a problem with the active database copy or the cluster node, a different node with a passive copy will replace the unavailable node. So keeping your sentences concise is one of the other things we want to points that we want to drive home. So I think we're a little bit out of time here, so I'm just going to come right to the conclusion. So just to wrap up, we're definitely going to see quality improvements. One of the most essential steps towards this is simply the ability to measure and judge quality, and that is exactly what a checking tool will do for you. Simplified English, if nothing else, it offers you a means to quantify quality, because you have 53 writing rules to work with, and all what the tool does is that it simply checks if the writer complies with those rules. Any violation of the rules means a potential quality loss. Any word that is in there that is not in the dictionary signifies a potential problem. So based on statistics, you get a good overview of how compliant and how good the quality of your documentation is. So we can definitely save cost as well as time. We're going to see, as you can see in some of these slides, which I didn't get to talk more extensively about. So a very important, like sometimes not even recognized benefit of simplified English is that it can provide information to the reader. It is not just the fact that the language is easier to understand for the reader, but actually the technical content becomes more accurate because validation is easier. So think about a scenario in the office where if you now present standard English text that is rather sloppy or rather complex, at least, if you show it to a subject matter expert, chances are, especially when his stress levels are high, he will say something along the lines of "that looks about right." Now, in simplified English, there is no such thing as about right. It is either true or false. It is correct or it is wrong. So the validation process becomes much clearer, much easier. It's more black and white than gray. It is also just about impossible to write anything vague in simplified English when you are regulating the words that you use. So, and you are assigning quite a definitive meaning to those words. So we are going to see present information to the reader that is more to the point, more accurate, more reliable, and that is a very great benefit all in itself. Now, because we have fewer words to choose from and because our syntax is highly regulated, you will see that you may have already spotted that we will use the same sentence patterns time and time over again. It means that our text becomes more repetitive, meaning that if we have two sentences that are very, very similar in content, they are very likely to follow the very same pattern with maybe just one or two words different. So this basically is one of the elements that contributes to facilitating reuse, improving the efficiency of content management, making it easier to create a piece of information once and reuse it several times over based on objective criteria and based on trying to keep product-specific information separate from general or generic information. So for those people who like graphs more than text, just an overview how the number of unique terms, the translatability, and the overall volume of the text are affected by the use of simplified English as compared to standard English. So we would have far fewer, around 30% of the terms that we would find in standard English. Only 30% of those, only 30%, yeah, that's quite optimistic. Sometimes 70%, 30% of those we will still continue to see it in simplified English. So much more consistency, less variant. If you recall from the previous slide where writers were fishing from the same pool of words and rules. So the text in simplified English, according to our group of translators, will be much easier and faster to translate, and volume reduction, you can estimate this to be at a level of roughly 25%. Okay, so you see my photo here, so you know who has been boring you for the past 45 minutes. So at Schufran's Tech Docs, we work with a team of language and documentation experts to try and help our customers produce and publish documentation effectively. So I would like to thank you for your attention and interest in today's session, also pointing out that you're always welcome to visit our website or to contact us by email. If you have any questions and comments at all, this is a good time to speak.
Thanks for that, Shumin. I haven't seen any more questions come in. If someone has any question, if anyone's got any questions, they can unmute themselves, maybe ask Shumin directly or type it in.
Thanks, Darren.
Okay, looks like we don't have any other questions at the moment. Thanks for sharing your details there as well, Shumin. So if anyone's got any questions, if they want to contact Shumin after this meeting, you know where to get her at. I think we can probably wrap up early if that's everyone's okay with that, if there's no more questions coming through.
Yeah, so thank you, Swapnil, for moderating today's session and allowing me to share this background of mine with your audience today. So, of course, I didn't get to tell everything I had to say about STE because that's going to take much, much more time. So meanwhile, we do have one question coming in. How is technical writing different from documentation which business analysts prepare? So, well, maybe in a business setting. Swapnil, do you think you want to answer that? Do you actually work in the role of a business analyst sometimes, or?
Not really. I know there's I guess a little bit of a distinction between the types of documentation that's produced. So with business analyst Manpreet, they work on a lot of documentation that happens along with the product. So more on the requirement side, more checking out what what the business wants from a product or a project. With tech writing, I think it's more on the user side. But having said that, we do sort of dabble in stuff. So I help out business analysts with their functional specifications or technical specifications. But I think the line of distinction there is more the type of deliverables technical writers produce as opposed to business analysts. But at the end of the day, I think it still comes down to it's finding that information, talking to people, getting everything into a document that everyone understands and keeping it as simple as you can.
Thank you. So I feel that although the roles are clearly defined, the deliverables as summarized, as I'm going to summarize here, are quite different. But at the end of the day, you need to decide for yourself the tone of voice that you would like to adopt in the different kinds of writing that you send out or publish, audience depending. However, a few good writing principles still would underline the work that you do, that you have to keep this, you have to make sure that you always only use one word for one meaning. So you try not to be too colorful in your language or too ambiguous. So that's really the little bit that I can offer here. One of the other questions that I sometimes get is, how would technical writing be different from marketing? So I think the question in itself already gives you a clue that marketing is more geared towards if the intention is to get people to buy this product. So definitely I do not see STE having a very, very significant role in marketing text, but also sometimes our advice to the tech writers is that they should work closely with marketeers, making sure that there is no redundant sentences or language in the writing, because that could also be a off-putting element for consumers. Okay, so thank you all. I hope this is the first time, but will definitely not be the last time that we are speaking to you, and hopefully there will be future opportunities for us to look at STE in more detail, because today's session is more intended as an introductory note. Okay, thanks a lot.
No worries. Thank you, Shuman. Thanks everyone for attending. I'm going to make these presentation. Are you happy to share these slides as well, Shuman? So I can just probably pass it on to the people who are interested in having a look at the slide deck.
I was assuming that the slides would be as part of the presentation, so we won't actually be formally offering the content of these slides, because some of the content we are only allowed to show in a video presentation as opposed to an actual document.
And that's fine. That's perfectly okay. So you're right. The video should have captured all the slide pack anyway, along with the audio. So I think that's probably sufficient. But if you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch.
Feel free. We're always here to answer your questions. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So thank you, everyone. All right, I'm just going to finish up now. So thank you, Shuman. Thanks everyone for attending.
Okay, see you. Bye.
See ya.